So today we are joined by Ute, who is going to talk about her experiences of life and marriage. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. I am Ute Heggen, and I am a trans widow. That is a woman who escaped from a suddenly abusive marriage from a suddenly cross dressing husband. And I wrote a memoir about my experiences. My memoir is called In the Curated Woods True Tales from a Grass Widow and is available from iUniverse in this paperback as well as the Kindle version. It's really priced very reasonably, especially the ebook. And I also, under a different pen name, Leah Utsira, have written a children's science book called All About Leaves, same publisher, iUniverse.com/bookstore, and a book for children in the case of losing a grandparent or someone, and it's for mourning. I wrote that after my mother died at age 100 about 6 years ago now.
100,
And
wow.
yeah, my father lived to 90 and she lived to 100. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll, if I have such a stamina and all that, but I'm certainly going to try to fill my life with, you know, help to other women who do not believe that men can become a woman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like you've had quite a journey already.
hmm
So, would you like to tell us what happened and
Yeah.
how it
So,
all started?
yeah, I mean, I got married to him at the age of 21 in 1978. And I was pursuing a career in dance and he was doing graduate school in library and things like that. And I thought that we had a happy marriage. I had no idea that he had these obsessions or desires. It turned out that when I was 27, I had to stop dancing. And then I spent a year converting to Judaism because I had married into a Jewish family and I wasn't really connected to the Protestant faith that I had been raised in. And after that, then I got pregnant with our first child. And 3 years after that, had our second child. And when our children were 1 and 4, I was still nursing the little one. My husband came back to meet me in Chicago. We were living in New York City, but I took the train with the kids and met him in Chicago at his parents' apartment. And I remember it was Irving Park Road. And he had been in San Francisco for about 10 days for a business trip. At least that's what he said. And he
Okay.
came back with all of the hair on his chest, on his legs, and on his arms, and of course his face, shaved off.
Okay.
And that was pretty obvious to me because he had this wiry red hair, which I was sort of attached to. It was like
Mm-hmm.
part of his physicality that I found appealing and stuff. And I knew something must have happened in San Francisco. And he was very evasive. He wouldn't answer my questions about it. The children didn't notice. I was sort of wondering if our younger son would say, Daddy, how come you've got this stubble on your legs or something? And his parents acted like they didn't notice, despite the fact that it was August. This was August of 1992. And he was wearing shorts and short sleeve shirts and stuff. And it was, like he'd had to have his short sleeve shirt unbuttoned or something. You could see that he didn't have any hair on his chest. And so at one point, he and his mother and my sons were out at the playground. And I was like tidying up and packing up for the next segment of our trip, which was going up from Chicago to Madison, Wisconsin for my oldest sister's daughter's wedding. So I had this sort of earthquake happen in my life, and then we have to go off to a family, celebration and pretend that nothing happened. Anyway, when they were out there in the park, actually, my father-in-law was in his work office. He was a freelance writer. And so I just reached into his suitcase, which he had said, that's all packed. You don't need to open that. And I think he knew it would have been suspicious if he had locked it. So it wasn't locked. But I just thought, we have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. We have to carry all these diapers and all these different pairs of shoes. And when you're traveling, you have multiple sets of clothing for your children. Or going to a wedding, there's the fancy clothes. I just felt like oh, so I get to put it all in, their little backpacks and my suitcase, right? So I reached in and there they were, just, there they were. His suitcase was Pandora's box, and there were 3 sketch books, which, were the large kind of drawing paper sketchbooks. And in it is all of his journaling about his exploration of his female persona while cross-dressing and going to gay bars and sitting in gay bars where he thought that's the safest place for him, and seeing if he got the attention of men, because he was clearly seeking the attention of men. And but considered himself, therefore, actually, I'm a woman, I'm a heterosexual woman, but I'm just kind of trying this out with gay men because I have to, and it's sort of like, okay, start
Yeah.
telling yourself the truth. I have this other interpretation of this,
Yeah.
because the gay men don't regard him as female, they know he's male. And so I don't have any proof, but I do believe there was some anonymous hookups and that kind of thing going on. And I'm very fortunate, being that this would have gone back into the 1980s, and it was in the, like, 1989, 1990, 1991. I'm very fortunate that I did not contract any STDs. And so, because obviously, when we were trying for a second child, we were having unprotected, to
Yeah.
get me pregnant and
Well,
everything.
that was kind of the time of HIV and AIDS as
Yes.
well, wasn't it?
Yes, and we had lived in Manhattan in the 90s, and I was in the field of, professional modern dance, and so there were, some of my dance teachers died. Some, like 3 of
Right.
my male dance teachers who were my mentors died. I was particularly brokenhearted when Ernest Pugnano died, and back then they didn't have medicines they have now, and so the guys went through these terrible cancers, Kaposi's sarcoma and all this. And so, I mean, I do kind of wonder if that affected my husband's thinking,
Yeah.
because maybe if it hadn't been for the AIDS crisis and all of that, maybe he would have just come out as gay. There was an encounter we had once in Manhattan, would have been about 1987, maybe 1986, when a guy who seemed, pretty gay, the way he moved and dressed and everything. And he came up and tapped my husband on the shoulder and said, "Oh, hi, great to see you again." And my husband, frowned and said, "This is a mistaken identity. I don't know you." And then that guy sort of, just slunk down a side street. We had been walking down Broadway. And I just, that's, I
It
guess,
seems over the top to react like that.
right. And he wouldn't talk about it. And but I mean, then you look back and all these little incidents come back to you. This is what happens to trans widows or any woman who's discovering, infidelity. I actually have a friend here where I live whose husband was a bigamist and had a second family. And suddenly he brings this daughter who is the same age as the son they had together. And that's how he decided, to let her know. And
Goodness.
so it's really very similar in terms of the betrayal that the woman
Yeah.
feels. It's like you have a separate secret life. And this guy acted, like, "Well, now I'm telling you, you should be happy I'm being honest with you." And it's like, are you kidding? Here I've been scrimping and saving, and you've been going spending money on this other family, and she never got child support, that kind of thing. So that's just kind of interesting. And I wish that the psychologists and the mental health people would understand that, because, I'm sure that they would recognize that a woman who discovers that her husband has a whole second family,
Yeah. It
would
would be
be
traumatic.
very, very sympathetic and understand
Hmm.
the shock and everything. Whereas currently, with most therapists, I find that they try to pressure the woman, even if it's therapy for herself. And I've had this when I've interviewed someone to be my therapist. Um, and I'm saying there are issues from the past involving my ex-husband, who claims not only to be a woman, he claims to be me, the mother of the children. And so therefore I explained this whole thing on the phone as I was interviewing,
Hmm.
to possibly be her client. And I said, so in my therapy, it would not be helpful to me to have the therapist dictate how I refer to this man who is the father of my children, who did various things, illegal things actually, to get out of paying child support and defamed me and so on and so on. And she said, well, it's really standard that, if someone has changed their gender identity, we use the pronouns that they, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not hiring you. You can't help me. I actually am really proud of myself. I wrote a letter to that facility, to the director, and I said, you should just decline to be the therapists for any trans widows.
Yeah.
And because if you're going to further damage us psychologically by demanding these pronouns, and I was told by so and so that this was standard in your facility, and she wrote me a letter back. I just said, you should find some older independent therapist in this area and just say, this person might be better for you because you are doing a disservice, and we live not
Absolutely.
so yeah. So,
But
and
like that's the whole thing of person-centered counseling
yes,
or therapy. That's what
right.
I'm trained in. It's
Yes.
about putting the client that you're working with at the center of everything.
Yeah. Well, it really relates similarly to this series of forfeits of the female volleyball teams here, because San Jose State University volleyball team has a trans-identified male on the female team, and even the swimming, with Riley Gaines and the swimming teams in that debacle, which is already like 2 years ago, the Will slash Leah Thomas, thank
Yeah,
you, thing. So those athletes in both that volleyball situation and the swimming were told by the university administration that if they have a problem with this, what they need is to kind of re-educate themselves, and they can go to the university mental health service. And this is, if you ask me, I can't remember which one is it. Is it straight out of Animal Farm or it's straight out of 1984. One of the Orwell books. It's like straight out of it. Up is
yeah,
down, two
yeah,
plus two is five, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's 1984. I've read that one.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Well, I had to
It's
read
like double
both.
speak, isn't it?
Yeah, I read both in high school, I guess.
Mm.
Um,
It just makes me feel angry hearing stuff like that. It's like
yes, I appreciate it.
it's
Thank you.
gaslighting, isn't it?
It's
It's
gaslighting.
just
Yes.
yes,
And
it's
of
like
course, for anyone who doesn't know, any viewer, listener who doesn't know, the verb gaslighting came from the American movie Gaslight, which had Ingrid Bergman. I can't remember the actor who played her husband, but the husband is a narcissist. And when the street lights, which are gas lights fueled by gas, get turned on by the city employee, that is the time when he's coming home and telling her that she didn't hear what she heard, she didn't see what she saw. And I guess they solve like she finds some friend and they solve some murder, and like this guy is a really bad guy. And so that's where, the verb gaslighting came from. And it's also ritual manipulation and coercive control.
definitely.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, when I started my channel, Trans Widow Ute Heggen on YouTube, I developed a survey called 20 Questions to Ask a Trans Widow. And I now have 66 um, sort of filled out surveys from trans widows. Not all of the women were married to the guy, but if she had a relationship of, say, a year or more where this kind of gaslighting and manipulation occurred, then she qualifies. I have gotten quite a few inquiries from women who are still stuck in these marriages who haven't left. And I have to tell them that I regret it. If you want to contact me and ask me some advice about how to get out, I can be there for you, but you can't be included in my data because, and also it's entirely possible that if your husband has just been discovered or come out to you as having a female persona and he's trying to work on you to engage in kink sex with him, or to tolerate what he does, or go along with renaming himself for the children he's fathered and all that kind of thing. If you are under the same roof, you could be in danger, and it could even fall out to me because he can go on your computer or your phone and find our emails.
Yeah.
Because these guys are often very clever with tech, and they do stalk their wives. There are a few social media platforms. I think there's a Reddit platform for, I don't know if they call them trans widows, but for, the wives of, but the men come on, they're not blocked. So they come on and they stalk their wives and to see what they're saying. And so you can't, if any of the husbands have access to the forum that you are trying to get advice on, you shouldn't be there, not based on what these guys sometimes do in the data. And there is, for example, there is more than one, but I can name one wife, Jennifer Anderson, who was strangled to death by her husband, Keir Anderson. He tried to make it look like a suicide, strung her body up in the night. They had two young daughters, and she was trying to leave. So the time when you're trying to leave is the
It's the
most
most
risky,
dangerous.
and it's important kind of to plan it and have it, figure out who you trust and who your friends are, and leave under the cover of darkness, basically. But Keir Anderson is now serving 20 life in a California women's prison estate, and he's allowed to have a podcast called,
In prison.
yeah, he's allowed to have a podcast called Ear Hustle. I'm wondering if I have the wrong person, because there are quite a few men,
Yeah.
not all of them killed their wives, but there are quite a few men, who have taken on a female persona and are convicted of murder. So uh, I'm pretty sure that he's the one who has Ear Hustle podcast, and
So, sorry, can I just go back? Are you saying that there's quite a few men who've killed people, but not necessarily their wives in
yeah,
prison? Yeah. Okay.
in prison and serving their time in the female
Yeah.
prison. There's a
Okay. They're in
notorious
the
one.
female prison as well.
Yeah. Now there was the famous conversation between a man who ideates a female persona and a presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, that got part of that clip got used in one of the famous Republican ads that ends, she's for they, them, we're for you. And in that conversation, I looked up the whole conversation because it was probably back when she was running for Attorney General of California. And she was making this signaling to California voters that she's very, tolerant and inclusive, including that male convicts. They called them inmates. It's like as if they were staying in a hotel, or if they were under house arrest or something like that. But these are people who have been convicted of murder by a jury of their peers in California. And I can't at the moment think of the name of the one that they referenced, but she apparently, as attorney general or as a prosecutor or something like this in California, intervened such that this man who had murdered three people, a couple that was grandparents and a man, in the service of stealing money so that he could spend it on the so-called sex change operations that he wanted. And the taxpayers of California have paid for that to happen while he serves life for murder, for cold-blooded murder of three people, three innocent people.
Unbelievable.
And the ACLU has a case. They're trying to get him moved out of San Quentin into the same women's facility, prison facility, to serve his life term with women. So, and this is a reliable story. This was reported after that went public, it was reported by a former prosecutor from that area of California, and he knew about that convict, that felon, What's interesting then, when that was reported by more right-leaning podcasters, they would say things like, well, that guy isn't really true trans. And it's like, oh, yes, he is. He got all the operations and he wants to walk around San Quentin with lipstick and eyeshadow on. Yeah, he is. You can't say he's not. The ACLU is trying to get him in with the women. So, there are these shifting definitions that are happening, as people who haven't heard about this because the legacy media has not been reporting it, as they're hearing it, they're experiencing cognitive dissonance. They can't believe that the ACLU would really promote this so-called healing, huge surgeries for this triple murderer. De Leon actually was one of his names. Yeah, that much I can recall. I mean, like, I have a list somewhere. So if we have time, I will go through what my 20 questions are and what my
Yeah, go
data.
for it.
Yeah. So the first question is, now this is with data from 65. I will add the 66 in certain questions where I remember what her answer was. I just got this yesterday from her. Was his cross-dressing a revelation or your discovery? 22 discovered, like the way I did, and 34 were a revelation. Now, this doesn't add up to 65 because there are just a few of these profiles that I got from interviews where I wasn't able to really send out the survey, but the woman had answered like 17 of the questions in her interview that I listened to over and over again to get the answers. So I include those into the data. Of course, I've been attacked that I'm not a professional and that my data is insignificant. I don't have a PhD. There was a group, some kind of, they were called open source, mental health something. And they at first were interested in this. I wanted to write a paper for them. And then they came back to me. I sent them some samples of what I'm revealing and about their profession. And they came back to me and said, I'm sorry, but we can't publish anything from you because you don't have a PhD.
That's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
As long as you're open about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yes. Yeah. And I've protected people. I use pseudonyms, and these women volunteered. I have done a lot of vetting. I mean, a lot of the trans data is based on somebody like Jack Turbin, who is a propagandist, going to Reddit or Tumblr on some forum and saying, can you who consider yourself trans answer these 15 questions? And so they don't even know, and when they don't use terms that are biological, so they don't know what the actual sex is. He did this whole study where his results were making the claim that there hasn't been this huge surge of females who are ideating as males. But in the data that he is citing as his proof, you are not able to discern who is male and who is female. So the whole thing is
So
completely
he doesn't
invalid.
know.
The conclusion is entirely invalid, and they don't know if people went on from a different computer with a different name, a different handle, and they're, because this is, they're just trying to manufacture propaganda,
Yeah. And
Yeah,
someone
okay.
could have done it more than once, I'm
Right,
guessing.
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
They can check if something came from the same computer, but there are many ways around this. These kids are
Yeah.
very, very clever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 2, did he tell you it's under control, not frequent, and then it escalated out of control? That's 36. So that's just over half. Did he select a therapist? Did that therapist or he claim the marriage is now a lesbian relationship? Now, many did not have, that kind of relationship therapy together with him and that kind of thing. But yes, for 16, that they went to the therapist with the husband when this comes up to the surface. And then the therapist says, well, you're in a lesbian relationship now.
Unbelievable. Like, the thought of me telling my client what they are
I know.
It's alien to
Well, it's
me.
also
I just
insulting to
wouldn't.
lesbians,
Yeah,
to make the
of
assumption
course.
that this is this shifting sexual orientation. And of course, it means that if you are attracted to this man who is, maybe a little more female, he has certain traits or something like this, that you must be in a lesbian relationship. It's like, no, what I'm in is an abusive, coercive relationship with a narcissist. 4, did he spend money secretly, have a secret account, spend it on wardrobe, makeup, electrolysis without you knowing? Credit card debt. That's 29 of us, so that's approaching half. It's more than a third. Did he wear your clothing or makeup? 31. I am saying I don't know if I mean, he's a larger size than me, and I would have noticed if my clothes were stretchy, but certainly clothes were bigger when I was in my pregnancies. So he certainly could have tried on my pregnancy outfits when I was not there. Did he suggest or coerce or cajole you into sex role play, in quotes, whereby you are to use a strap on, i.e., dildo, or other sex toy and play a male part in bed? 26. So that's over a third. Did a therapist suggest any of the above? 7 of us, including me, had the therapist suggest that. Now, I didn't do this. I refused to try it out, for which his therapist, the one that I saw in person, called Ruth, I call her in my book Ruth the Charlatan. She started outlining and telling us which store we could go to where they're really good at servicing these couples. This practice had this whole thing, this mantra or promotion advertisement that they're the ones who keep the couples together. It's horrible. 2 women also. Or more than 2, probably. Okay, so that was 7 of us, because I consider this sexual harassment. For a
Yeah.
therapist to suggest, when you're not there to talk about, you're not there for sex therapy, right? You're not there because you have some kind of a hang up with sex and you want help with this or something like this.
No, why? I don't get that as a counselor. I don't get why anybody would do that in a like as an intervention. It's completely against all the ethics.
Right. I consider it malpractice.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So, but this is actually pretty common. And then along with that, just as an aside, this isn't part of the survey, just recently with some of the practitioners making comments in YouTube videos or blogs that I make comments on about trans widows. These people who say that they're a gender therapist or something, they say, oh, the women often stay happily. Now, in my data are women who did stay for up to 10 years, and it reams you. It's damaging to the psyche.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. This is 8. Did he defame, vilify, or attack you in affidavits submitted to court or on social media? 29. So that's approaching half. And with, no negativity, in the reactions. He's entitled to do that because, of course, people assume that the wife is going to go crazy and she's going to yell things and and yeah. And yeah. Okay. Did he claim to any therapist or a group of friends that you ever abused him verbally or physically? 17. Yes. And my ex-husband submitted 2 sworn affidavits to court stating incidents from years before that he turned into an attack, a physical assault on him. Now, I think when this came out in court, we were going through our divorce, I think the judge said, was law enforcement involved? Do you have some records of this? And of course not. He's 5 inches taller than me. He was a kind of a slight guy, but wiry, but definitely stronger than me, right? Like,
Yeah.
he
And
could have
he's
easily
claiming
pushed
that
me to
you
the side,
assaulted
whatever. Like,
him.
this is just
Like,
but it's pretty common. Okay. Did he attack you physically? Please indicate whether it was choking, shoving, punching. And now I am aware that choking is not the correct term to use. The correct term to use is battery, strangulation. And I do include the murder by strangulation of Jennifer Anderson in these data because in the reporting on that case, I had enough of her experiences where he was trying to force her into this so-called polyamory situation, and she couldn't figure out how to get out, and there they are with two little daughters and stuff. So I'm including the one murder. So that's 21 out of 65. Did he force unwanted sex with you? And more than once, law enforcement involved. There were 3 rapes, and one was pimped and sort of gang rape. So I'm going to call it as 4 out of it, but a total of sexual assaults, 28.
Was that 28 women? So it could have happened more
28
than.
women sexually assaulted by their husband when he's pretending to be a woman. It's related to the hypnosissy pornography and violent pornography, which he wants to act out. Which, by the way, when I went to see this Ruth the charlatan, basically to say to her, as far as I'm concerned, the marriage is over. Stop sending Neddy, which is my pen name for my ex-husband, stop sending him back to me to tell me that Ruth says this, you haven't tried this, we could try this. So Ruth said I should try watching this pornography with him and then go to the sex store with him and go get the accoutrements. And I said, I'm not into it. And I was years ago seeking as a professional modern dancer, I was in ballet technique classes with some of the best dancers in the world in the middle 1980s in New York City. People from the Joffrey Ballet, people from the Paul Taylor Dance Company, Merce Cunningham, all of these, Bill T. Jones, and I was kind of trying to get into those companies, and then my feet gave out. But I said to her, I know that I am not attracted, even though I have been in close proximity of some of the most beautiful sculpted female bodies that exist in the world.
Yeah.
So, and she was kind of taken aback by the layered response I had to that,
Yeah.
because what they come back with is, well, have you tried it? How do you know until you've tried it? So that was like, listen, I've been in groups with women and, I wasn't attracted to them. I'm not bisexual, and don't call me a lesbian. My lesbian friends are insulted by
Yeah, definitely.
that. So the forcing unwanted sex, yeah, I said 28. And there's one really egregious rape that occurred in London. And this young mother, trans widow, is sort of in hiding. She's in semi-hiding. She had witnesses. She had fluid evidence. The baby was only about a month old. So this is child endangerment. And a few weeks after it got reported, she did the rape kit, all this stuff. The Met police called her back and said, we don't have enough evidence to prosecute. And she lives in fear that he's going to do this to another woman. And she lives in fear that he's going to have, at some point later, that he's going to have unrestricted access to this daughter.
Really worrying for her.
Yes. And, the psychologists don't know anything about this. That, they've put these guys on estrogen. They've written the letter for them to get all these bodily sex trait modification surgeries. And they don't know that these men sexually assaulted the wife before she got out. It's sort of like the her penis story from the court cases in the UK, right?
Yeah.
I think that might be changing. I think that some of the executive orders in the US at least will,
Hopefully.
help women to be able to say the correct pronouns about their rapist in court. Number 12 is, did you live below the poverty line or require governmental or family financial assistance at any time after the end of the relationship? 27. And this was interesting. When I first started gathering information, I just said, did you live below the poverty line? Because that's what happened to me. I had to work 3 jobs. Even though he had a tech job, he was lying about what it was. Later, he became the chief operating officer with 51% equity in the company. And this is often the case, that in order to have all their money for themselves, to get their, 57 shades of lipstick and their Imelda Marcos collection of size 12 shoes and so on, they refused to support the children that they fathered.
I mean, I
And
think that's common in all,
all
not all,
divorces,
a lot of divorce.
right?
But yeah, that's particularly shocking if the man's spending money on shoes and stuff like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
It's
And that, I mean, sometimes that's the discovery. The woman discovers the bills. The Celia, who is trans widow number 65, said, well, I discovered that he had accrued $35,000 worth of debt. She was like, I don't know about secret accounts, but in the divorce, I discovered that he had $35,000 worth of debt. And I'm like, okay, that's a yes. Right. And sometimes now, see, you can get deliveries to even a store will have
yeah,
a UPS counter, or there will be even some kind of automated
like a
locker
locker. Yeah,
things. So these men are absolutely able to spend all this money on their cross-dressing habits very, very secretly. There was one even, she found, he left, and after he left, she found a credit card in her mother's name that he had taken out and had spent money for himself. And I think her mother had just died or something, so
well,
he
that's fraud,
was,
isn't it?
I know it's fraud. And these guys never get prosecuted for any of this. I mean, what my ex-husband did was he committed financial fraud twice in court. And the second one in New York State, there's a 20-year window when you can go back to court, but you have to have proof. And basically it was, I would have had to have access to his contract, his equity contract with Gallery Systems, the company that he's now retired from. And interestingly, his presence is completely wiped from their website. So I consulted an attorney because I'm owed something like, or I and my children are owed something like, $86,000 from support that he never paid, that he got out of because he said he was poor when he, at the same time, he was purchasing or living in um, a co-op apartment in Brooklyn in a good neighborhood that is now worth between 2 and 3 million, completely paid off during the time when he was a deadbeat dad, not paying child support. And the thing is, when you say, once in a while a troll comes on, I haven't had too many trolls, but once in a while some troll comes on, says I'm making it up, or then says, well, you've had such a lousy life, why don't you go find a tall building and then go jump off? And I just block those guys. And I
Yeah,
haven't, because I try to cultivate positive comments
yeah,
on my
absolutely.
channel and on my blog, so I just block those guys. I don't bother to reply, but basically, if there is someone who's saying, equivocating things, and I write about the experiences that I'm now collecting data on, they go back and forth a little while. They accuse me of lying, and then I, cite something else and say, what woman would say that this happened to her? This is embarrassing that this happened to you. And
Yeah,
then they
when
just stop. They just are like, I shut them up, you know.
yeah,
So anyway, so that's financial abuse. And did any members of the clergy, like priests, rabbis, or ministers, suggest that you give in to his request to keep your family together, in quotes? And there were 6. Most were not really practicing any religion, and so they didn't go
yeah,
for that kind of advice, but some did. And I
mhm,
just want that to be out there, that this is happening. Even a priest, or I mean, like, this is not in Judaism at all. I studied Judaism very thoroughly. It is not in Judaism at all. And once I spoke to one of the rabbis that was, the 3 panel that I converted with. This was a couple of years ago, and he kept on saying she for my ex-husband. And I said, when you're talking to me, can you please say he, because I consider this insulting, you know?
yeah,
And so that means that, other than, for example, the Orthodox branch of Judaism, all the other branches are captured. And as a matter of fact, as far as my Jewish observance goes, I sort of feel like, okay, I might have to redo my conversion and become Orthodox, because there's the the conservative congregation here in my kind of small town folded, and they folded into and joined the Reform Synagogue. And outside of the Reform Synagogue is not a Jewish anything kind of a flag or banner or anything, but rather the trans flag. A huge trans flag. It hangs from their facade that you have to walk by to go into the sanctuary.
It's everywhere,
So,
isn't it?
yeah, and yeah. So, and one time I left a message about behind the looking glass on their phone number thing, and just said, you should know that there are trans widows, and as a member of the clergy you may become aware of someone who is falling apart, some woman who's falling apart because of this, and so I will give you my phone number and they can consult with me. But I have to just tell you that the trans flag outside of your sanctuary is going to prevent a woman like me from getting the spiritual and mental health guidance that she needs in a very, very stressful time. And I advise you to go to Lime Soda Films YouTube channel and watch the documentary about us called Behind the Looking Glass. Unbeknownst to me, the rabbi at that synagogue is a woman on testosterone who has facial hair. Later, I looked up because what they did was they called the police, and they had the police come knock on my door to do a wellness check, as if I had left a message that I'm suicidal. Now, does a suicidal person leave a message that the clergy at that institution should really go online and look for Lime Soda Films YouTube channel and spend 2 hours watching a documentary? That is not what someone says when they are
No,
in that kind of, crisis.
absolutely not. There's no sign of
So they,
suicidality or
and these
anything.
are people who are very big on the marching and chanting defund the police. But whenever they have an excuse to call the police on someone with my biologically related beliefs, they call the police on us. I mean, you have that in the UK, right? Where
Yeah,
because of a tweet, the police will come knocking at your door.
yeah, that's happened.
Yeah. Has it happened to you?
No,
No. Okay.
no, it hasn't. No,
Okay. So,
thankfully.
yes. And okay, did any friend or therapist or teacher suggest that you are now obligated to share Mother's Day? Now, this is where, if I had really been thinking about this, I would have just separated out a set of questions for the mothers, because for a lot of women, they didn't have children, so it doesn't apply. But 5 of us have been told we need to share Mother's Day with our ex-husband. And in fact, when the weekend visitation schedule of my children over to their father landed on the weekend of the American Mother's Day, he would not even bring them back to me at 4 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock so that I could have more of a Mother's Day with my children. He wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
So I sort of ended up like rescheduling holidays. He abandoned Father's Day completely. We didn't live close enough to either of the grandfathers to be able to visit them on Father's Day. And at that time in the 1990s, I didn't have access to things like these Zoom
yeah.
things. So it's sort of like all of the holidays change, and that's true of divorce in any case. But when you're taking away from the children the father, you're just sort of emptying out. That person becomes a shadow, right? It is damaging to children.
I was gonna say just the whole impact on a child of this must be
Yes.
horrendous.
And now
It must be.
what the PhD psychologist, who is now decertified because I made a complaint about her. She had a huge practice. I didn't think of making a complaint about her until, unfortunately, all these years later. But it's possible that she was engaging in insurance fraud. And also, I think that the state board certifying marital and family counselors found that the sworn affidavits that she submitted into my divorce were inappropriate, because she said that if our children develop any kind of trauma response or crisis after this, it is not at all due to their fathers entering into his authentic self It is due to Ute's refusal to acknowledge and try to live with him as his authentic self to, in quotes, keep the family together.
So you're
So,
blamed the whole time.
yeah. So they're very, they're threatened by the information that the wives have, because we have all the information. Like, you know, I would like Bruce Jenner's ex-wife to, come clean about a few things. I
Yeah.
mean, she would be subject to all the cancellation, and she probably cares about her, her public profile, so she's not going to do that. Although she did say publicly that she felt like, looking back, was her marriage really a marriage?
Yeah.
And many of the children here of these women in my survey are kind of too young. They're not in school yet. So the thing about sharing Mother's Day isn't, there yet. And then in your own individual therapy, the therapist say, she's female now. You need to say my ex-wife instead of my ex-husband. So that's 9 of us, 9 out of 65. Did you lose a set of friends? 31 out of 66. I added her into that. Did he start self-identifying as mother of the children he fathered or was stepfather of? 16. That's very common. People
Yeah.
should not be shocked about that at all. And as a matter of fact, in blue states where the term gender has replaced sex in the law, men are allowed legally, in legal documents regarding their children, to identify themselves as mother. I'm waiting for our new administration here in the States to possibly make an executive order about that, but there are states' rights, so that would be a whole thing. What I would advocate for is, I feel that as soon as he does this and make some kind of official things that you can use as documents, I think we should be able to have the marriage annulled legally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did he co-opt your experience of childbirth, using the details of your labor to convince new friends of his female status and role as mother? Yes, for 6 of us.
What's he doing? So he's
He's claiming to have gone through labor. Yeah. I was lucky and had 2 natural labors. The first, both very, very typical. The first one, 12 hours, the second one, 5 hours. And he was there, being the dad at that time. But in subsequent years, when he was transitioned, so to speak, he did that. And the reason I know is because there were people in his circles who saw me with our children, like when they were in school and stuff, in the school community, who, there was one woman, for example, who said, "Why are they calling you mom? You're not their mom. You're the nanny." Like, right in
what?
front of my children.
My God.
So I went into my stories of going into transition, meaning the baby's head is entering the birth canal. Like, I just went all into she had a kid. So I'm like, talking about the labors and stuff like that. And there was someone who was kind of like more on my side and came up to me, giving me the intelligence that he was giving details about how long the labors were, and how intense they were, and that, with the second time, no episiotomy, the first time a half hour of pushing, the second time just 2 pushes. I mean, but he had a way of cleverly and manipulatively and deceptively phrasing all of that, such that it was his labors, it was his childbirths. And what a lot, this is the whole thing about cervix haver, menstruator, whatever else they say,
Chest feeder.
a chest feeder, right? All of that is in the service of them taking on mom. I think that the thing about the language is really interesting, because they want the mother label. They don't want to erase the mother label unless they're one of the ones who just say parents, or, I mean, there's a whole bunch of, like, I think they're finding this in the US Department of Education, that there was guidance in there suggesting that teachers, this was actually in the military guidance too, this has recently been exposed, that they're erasing the word mother, that you should say parent, and you should say
Yeah,
non-sex
they've done that in the NHS
biological.
as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all the adverts and
Oh,
like the information about
right.
like cervical cancer and things like that. They don't mention the word woman,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then there's chest feeding it. Yeah,
Yeah. Which is actually contributing to the damage that's happening to the young girls who are being groomed and lured into this because they have early exposure to pornography and they are, rejecting the idea of having intercourse as a female later on. And they're too young to be like, this is 8-year-olds or something who are seeing pornography on the phone. And it's actually causing both boys and girls to enter into a state of body dissociation because they're too young to be seeing it done that way. And so then this language, this indoctrination language of chest havers and or chest feeders and uterus havers and people who menstruate, right? That is setting up these girls to like become radicalized to and reject, their own body.
yeah,
And right now, what I'm seeing is in the various sources where I find the information, like segm.org, Society for Evidence Based Gender Medicine, and a few of the other places where I'm looking for information, these girls are. It's just, even in the doctor's office, like the doctors are asking, what's your gender? And the thing is, an insecure 11-year-old or 12-year-old who's just starting adolescence, who doesn't have breasts yet and stuff, might think that the doctor is indicating to her that she actually doesn't have normal development for a child her age, because probably in her head, she's thinking, I have friends who already have breasts, they have a bosom, but wow, like I was late. I
mm,
was this skinny dancer kid, and I was late with all of that stuff. And so they're interpreting what the doctor is saying to them of, oh, I kind of see something in you that maybe is more male. You're possibly one of those trans boys.
yeah,
And so that, this is Frankenstein. This is really odious. It's amazing to me. What happened was my children were very loyal to me. After I got them through college, I had to take their father back to court. He wouldn't pay anything. And it was only years later that I found out he was chief operating officer and had a 51% stake in the company and all this, had a really ritzy life. I think when he joined that firm, he actually didn't say that he was the parent of our two sons, because what happened was he married a woman. In his diaries, he wrote all about wanting male attention, but then I think it didn't work
right.
because he doesn't act like a woman. He's
Well,
kind of an
men tend
alpha
not to.
male in many ways. And, the mechanics don't work. And he was in his 30s. Maybe these guys, I heard through the grapevine that he did have a couple of dates with men. I actually have like 2 degrees of separation from a woman who dated the same man that Nettie dated. This is going back into the middle 90s. But then that kind of probably panned out because most normal men who are not, drug addicts and alcoholics and stuff like that, or fetishists, if they're looking for a relationship, they're looking for a regular woman, they're looking for maybe starting a family, all that stuff. So it didn't work out for him with men. And he decided to become a lesbian. He found this young woman who's much younger than us, like 15 years younger than me, 17 years younger than him. And they got married when same sex marriage was legalized. Like they actually have heterosexual marriage, even though he doesn't have all the male parts. So she had a son who is a stepbrother to my sons. And at the time, like my sons were very resentful of him. He seemed like a spoiled brat when he was little. And they just saw him for the, every other weekend and one day a week visitation time and stuff. But now that he's 20 years old and my sons are in their 30s, like my older son is going to be 37 in the spring, and it looks like the women that they're married to don't want to have kids. It's sort of like that whole woke platform, but they feel, I believe, rather fatherly towards him.
Yeah,
And they don't want that relationship to be taken away from them because their father, Nettie, demonstrated taking relatives away from my sons. his own relatives on his side of the family. Like
Yeah.
there was a famous uncle who wrote for the New York Times, who was the grandfather's younger brother, and he really cared about us, and I had to go like secretly take my children to go visit him and see and stuff like that. And Nettie made a point of making his mother call up this great uncle before my older son's bar mitzvah because he was invited, and my son was excited that this Uncle Lou was going to come. He mentioned it to Nettie a week before the bar mitzvah, innocently. And I have him then, Lou, calling me up saying, look, I can't come because, Nettie's mom called me and said she doesn't want you there because Lou was, too nice. I mean, this is taking a person away from your sons, from your 13-year-old son who is doing this, making this accomplishment that's like a big deal in the Jewish world. He memorized all this Hebrew and chanted from the Torah and all this stuff. And his great uncle, who would be so proud of him, who lived close by, was planning on coming. And that invitation got rescinded. Um, and also the great grandmother, let's see, I'm trying to think. Yeah, the great grandmother, the grandmother's mother had come here as a child from Russia after one of the pogroms in, I think, Kiev. And from, I guess, or if it was Russia or the Ukraine at that time. And she lived into her 90s, which was into the late 1990s after we got divorced. And I said, if you want to go see her, I'll give you permission to have some of my vacation days with the kids if you're going to go do that. She was in a nursing home and like down south, kind of far away. And he said to me, without any feelings of guilt or shame or anything, he said, well, we don't think she would understand my changes. And so, I don't go see her or contact her, and I'm not going to bring the children to see her.
That's just
I just,
awful,
that's
isn't it?
stealing your children's history. This grandmother had stories about the Cossacks, and how her mother somehow scared the Cossacks not to look in this one cupboard because of the way she acted, and therefore some of the preserved, sausages were not stolen from them, and they had food to eat before they managed to come over here. I mean, so my children are denied great grandma Ethel. Like so. It is totalitarianism of a kind. It really is. And it's certainly female erasure and mother erasure.
Yeah.
So, I hope that I managed to kind of unspool this with enough logic and continuity, for people to understand.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
yeah, it's a comfort to me to know that I'm not the only one. I felt really quite isolated. And now with what happened was with my children and how they got alienated from me is the J.K. Rowling stuff, where J.K. Rowling put out, this was maybe 2020.
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling put out that tweet about don't call me a menstruate or a something haver or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there was this firestorm, and they, tried to cancel J.K. Rowling, and she wasn't going to have it. And I let my children know that I felt the same way. And what was ironic about it is I allowed Nettie to have all of the Harry Potter as bedtime stories that he read to our children. I didn't say, oh, you're reading something, something, the second book of Harry Potter. Where page are you on? I'll read it to you now. I did other books to read
Yeah.
to them. And so now Jake, like I wonder if he defames J.K. Rowling for that,
Probably.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. None of it makes sense. And it's damaging. And it happens that after Nettie went through all of the surgeries and taking, like I guess he's been on estrogen. He's probably on his third of the breast implants because you have to replace them every 10 years. It seems like each time they got bigger. I don't know. Meow, meow. So I'm
Yeah.
not looking to get bigger anywhere on my aging body.
No.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just, I wonder, are they like lowering the estrogen for him? Because the fact is, after he, sometime in the late 1990s, his own father, whom he hated, and I think the abuse of his father on him when he was a young kid, that was a story from both him and his next older sibling, his sister, that he got whipped with a belt and for no reason and this kind of thing. But his father later had a couple of strokes and heart attacks. So this is a male in a family with a history, and there was a couple of uncles too. That one uncle who got, canceled, he also had a couple of heart attacks, and they both had, stents or whatever. They lived well. The father, Nettie's father, has died now, but he had a couple of strokes and heart attacks, which he survived. But I mean, that's a factor. No male who has that kind of family history in the male line. And there's a cousin in the next generation, a male cousin in the next generation who, as a 28-year-old, had a stroke, which he is
So
completely recovered
estrogen's
from.
going to really damage his body.
Estrogen in that body with that male family history, it's just ill advised. It's ill
Absolutely.
advised. And then my understanding is when you've, you know, um, removed your gonads, this is something that I'm understanding from detransitioner Richie Herron.
Yeah.
And
He's
you,
local to me.
oh, wow,
Yeah.
I feel like you have the same speech
Yeah,
patterns.
we've got the same accent, yeah.
Yes,
Or
yes,
similar, yeah.
yes. Oh, and I do love it.
Hmm.
um, uh, you know, so your body is missing something if you detransition and aren't on the estrogen, but then there are problems with, regulating the levels of testosterone.
Yeah.
And
I think he
so
still has to take estrogen.
really,
I think so.
so that his bones don't demineralize.
I'm not sure what the reasons are, but I'm
Yeah,
sure I've heard him say that.
yeah. And the other thing about my ex-husband that I think is completely related to the recent executive orders in the US is that he, as a hobby, has pursued a type of martial art using the poles, the, Taekwondo type martial art on a women's team. I Googled his name and looked him up, and there he was, like, up there, inches above all the other women. He has a hard time smiling in pictures, it looks like, on everything, every picture that's out there. He's probably in constant pain or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, he never seemed like, oh, now so happy and, what do you call it? Trans euphoria or something like
Yeah.
that. He never acted like that. So,
No.
there you
So
have it.
how long did it take you to find someone else in a similar situation to you?
I only have found people online. I guess I was being interviewed on some channels, and then, I leave a little path to contact me, to email me.
Hmm.
And now when someone puts in a search of the term trans widows, I usually come up.
Yeah. I was
And
going to
there's
say that must have been really lonely because one of the ways of feeling like you're not alone is to find more people in the same situation as you. And that would have been really difficult before the internet or even after the internet.
right. And then see what Nettie's mental health people wanted me to do was to be in some kind of a support group with women who stay. They offered me that. And I heard that one of those women in Queens then killed herself. There
Oh,
are,
goodness.
as far as I know, and this is not really data because it's just somebody said that
Yeah.
their sister-in-law's mother-in-law, whatever, killed herself after her husband did this. But I know of the fact that there are at least 4 suicides in the world of trans widows after the husband did his so-called transition. We are very vulnerable. Typically,
Yeah.
we get PTSD.
And
And yeah,
and it's compounded because everyone's so
yeah,
worshipping trans
yes,
these
yeah,
men who are
yes.
doing this.
Yes, one of the stories that's in my memoir is this guy that I call Arthur in the book, who I was thinking of, contracting with him to be kind of an editor and a writing coach. because he has a master's degree in, writing or something like that, creative writing, or I don't know what. But our entire friendship fell apart as I was about 2/3 of the way through my book. And I just read a certain part to him. And he said, "Well, this is really good for you. This is really good for you that you're getting this out and everything, but you have to take it out of the book. You can't publish that." And he's this young guy, he's like, you know, in my book, young, he's like 34 years old. And he actually, his wife painted that picture. That picture is of young Ute, and it's from a photograph. So I lost my really fun relationship with them and their little family. They had a child during the time that I was friends with them. And then COVID started, and we would do things like, have a picnic outside and all this kind of stuff. And I was very generous. I paid to have a couple of pictures painted, and she's an artist. And so I thought, maybe he could help me with the editing of the book. And he basically tried to shut me down. He said, "Oh, you can't do that. You can't put in, what you suffered. I mean, write about your recovery. I like this story about how you're doing your gardening and it made you feel so much more released. And, that's great. That's all really great. But you can't write about what he did, because that would, and he said, I can't have anything to do with it. I don't want to be listed as, I don't want to have a dedication to me. I don't want anything in the book to mention me or anything, because my wife and I will get canceled. We're artists. I'm a writer. She's an artist. We'll get canceled. I can't have anything to do with it." And he actually got, like stern with me,
Mm.
and said, "They are one of the most abused cohorts in the world." And I said, "Well, I
No,
just
they're not.
read you. I just read you what he did. And I'm, going online now and finding a few instances. I think really the first, other trans widow that I saw an extensive interview with was Linehan, Graham Linehan.
Yeah, did
He
he do one?
interviewed, she lives in Ireland now. She's an American, and I forget her, Jennifer, I think, Jenny, but she was in Behind the Looking Glass also.
Okay.
And she said that she's pretty much canceled in this small town in Ireland where she lives. And her children are in their teenage years. And she relayed in a different interview, she relayed a conversation, like she's really, kind of hanging around with her daughter and her daughter's friends and stuff like that, to make sure that they're not going down this path themselves. And apparently the conversation came up about some, peer of theirs, of these girls, friends of her daughters, that are, saying they're non-binary or something like that. And she said something like, "Well, the researchers, even from way back, said people usually just grow out of this. It's a phase." And then her daughter says to her friends, "Well, consider my mom's a Nazi."
Daughter said that about her mother.
A daughter said that about her mother.
Oh my God. Like, so basically, trans widows are one of the most abused category, and you're not allowed to talk about it, or you'll
Right.
be abused some more. Like, that is
Yes.
absolutely outrageous.
Yes. Well, I've even had, like with these therapists that I decided, okay, we're not a good fit, that kind of thing. If I'm just trying to explain, my life history and why I'm trying to recover from PTSD, literally
Yeah,
like panic attacks where I'm
absolutely.
having chest pain, all that kind of thing. Um, and I bring up, things that my ex-husband did and reactions that the people around him had, thinking I'm not the mother, I'm the nanny. I mean, I remember at the time I was still in my 30s when this lady said that I'm the nanny, and I thought, wow, I should be flattered. She thinks I'm like 20 years old. And I had lost like weight. I was really thin at that time
Mm-hmm.
because I had lost weight from the stress. But the therapist that I decided we don't click, she made this comment of like, well, let's not get into the politics. And I
It's
was
not
like, well,
politics, that's your
I'm not
life.
getting into the politics. I'm telling you what happened to me. They don't want to know. They are
Oh my God.
willfully covering their eyes. The mental health corporate entity, which dovetails and makes money from all the drugs, right? They don't want to know about detransitioners. They don't want to know about trans orphans, the children of. They don't want to know about trans widows who have been sexually assaulted by their patient, because what we observe, which is recorded nowhere in their data, what we observe is that when a man goes on estrogen, he starts to have manic episodes. And sometimes those are, and I have women, I mean, like, these women are so honest, they don't exaggerate. Like, should I say that he assaulted me when what he did was punch his hand through the wall next to me? I mean, that's menacing, you
Yeah.
know?
And
And
that's what, well, anybody who's been abused will wonder if it was abuse.
yes,
That's a normal reaction. Like, was it
yes.
really abuse, or was it me? I deserved that,
And
or
also, there's a lot of, in a way, self blame
yeah,
for the women who did agree to try the kink in bed for a while, because they're sort of like, oh well, I was trying to be cool, and I had friends who were bisexual and friends who had an open marriage, and I was just like, okay, let's not completely turn everything about our life upside down. So okay, and the thing is, it's actually very damaging. It's
definitely.
it's essentially asking a woman to act out a scenario from violent pornography. That's what it's doing. And the field of psychology really needs to catch up with the
Definitely. So,
damage
did you
of
find a
pornography.
therapist in the end, or have you still not found someone?
Well, I have decided that my schedule of outside work, and I do what's called Nordic walking. It's sort of like
Yeah, yeah, I
walking
know
with
about that.
the
Yeah,
type of ski
with the
poles.
sticks.
Leki, Lecky is a good brand. You can get them inexpensively.
Hmm.
And I find that to really, it just completely takes my focus and gets me back into my mind body connected place. And
Yeah.
then I have a wellness checklist on my channel.
So you've basically
Uh,
had to support yourself through all this.
yeah, I have a wellness playlist, I mean, on my channel, and
Hmm.
I'm fortunate to be a former dancer, so I have these exercises that I roll around on the floor, and they particularly are exploring, like, the diagonals between, like, say, this is my left arm and my right leg, my lower right and my upper left. And I think this comes from a little bit of training that I got when I was a special education teacher, and the physical therapists and occupational therapists were giving us teachers a workshop about how to help some of these fidgety children with special needs to move around a little bit, and then I'll be able to focus on the academic work, or just to be doing the group activity for the class. And so I just, as I was starting my channel, I realized, I could help people. I could help people.
Yeah,
I would like,
definitely.
for example, to have my movements for wellness cited by mental health practitioners who are helping a female patient who thinks that she's dissociating from her body because of some of these trauma experiences, and she thinks maybe I'm, I inside my head I'm actually male, and that's why I'm so unsettled, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so a lot of the I've read, I know some people don't like Bessel van der Kolk, but it was helpful for me to read Bessel
yeah.
van der Kolk about
The body keeps the
PTSD.
score.
Yes, and
Yeah,
I just developed my own movement stuff for
yeah,
that. So I really, because I feel like, basically, and the one therapist, this was interesting. I think that there was some supervision. I had this one wonderful therapist, Iris, just a few years younger than me, really openly said to me that she doesn't believe in all the gender woo. And she was very helpful to me. I probably saw her for 3 years.
hmm,
And I think what happened was a supervisor in that facility started looking through her patient notes, and they took her away from me because they didn't like it that she was not using the captured language and everything according to the workshops that they got from Human Rights Campaign and trans rights and ACLU or whatever. And I got a message, like, they called me, and it wasn't her calling me. And it was this other person with a very, strident tone saying, well, Iris isn't seeing, people like you anymore. She has to see other people, and you could switch to this one or this one. And we suggest that you also do some other da 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 da. And if you can tell us what your schedule is, we can have this potential replacement therapist call you. And so then that subsequent one is the conversation that I had where I said, what pronouns are you expecting me to use? I'm telling you something. And the thing that Iris had told me, she said, I feel like I'm learning from you. I would come in with the latest study. I would write down the citation for her. And this is something that's been happening. I don't know if you've seen it, but she decided to stop seeing adolescents and teenagers. She's only seeing 19 and above
Yeah,
because she doesn't want to be responsible, and be sued by a detransitioner
absolutely.
when she's being forced to go immediately into this
Yeah.
proscribed
We just work with adults. We
affirmative.
don't work with
Yeah,
children. So, but no, if someone presented that way, I'd probably and wanted me to affirm, I probably would say we're not the right fit for
yeah,
you
right.
because we're going to fall out.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I recently had a very productive chat with a United States detransitioner, or well, he's really a desister. He didn't do anything medicalized, but this is Simon Price. And this got into the news. I think maybe he was in one of the British papers like the Daily Mail or something. He was doing his undergraduate senior concert at the Berklee School of Music. And the theme of this music composition had a words, component was that he falsely for a year thought that he should be female, but decided not to, and now he's better. And, sort of a pro health, kind of a message and stuff. And he was attacked, canceled. Berklee School of Music got so many complaints when this was advertised that they refused to host it. This is the college that his parents have paid tuition for. And so this whole brouhaha came up. Somebody helped him. I don't know if it was Fire or one of those, foundations for free speech helped him. And then MIT offered to host it. So he had it over at MIT. But he's become a public figure. He's in his early 20s. And he said that when he walks around Boston, where he lives, for the time being, he is sometimes recognized and people are very, very nasty. And no one says, how dare you? I'm going to stay with you and I'm going to protect you, Simon. You know, but
That's
he's
terrible.
brilliant. He really
That's really
knows what they're
terrible how people are
yeah,
being treated.
yeah. He really knows what they're doing wrong too. I think he's almost like a genius level. I think maybe he said he's autistic. I think it might be like Asperger's, like very, very high
Yeah,
intellect.
yeah.
And he's done a few things. He's met Richie Hare and he's done a few things. His girlfriend is a detransitioner her name is Luca Hine. Unfortunately, I don't know if this was someplace in Kansas. She had the double amputation of her breasts when she was 14. So this
Mm.
whole thing of, oh, this is not happening,
That's
that's
just
that's utter bollocks.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Ute, we've been talking for nearly an hour and a half,
Yes.
so
Yes. I
we'll
hope
wind
it's
it
not too
down
hard to
now.
divide.
If
Yeah.
you send me all your links, I'll put them in the description so people can find you and
Okay,
find out
good.
more because you've got a whole catalogue of videos on your YouTube
Yes.
channel as well.
hmm I mean, I think basically it's up to us because you know, the bodies, other than like the Hillary Cass and stuff, the regulating bodies, the professional bodies like AMA, I mean, over there, your Royal Academy ones might be a little bit better, but they are completely captured. And they're not going to say, okay, we're offering a recommendation of a non, in quotes, conversion therapy that will probably take you back to your mind body connection and make you feel healthier and better for the rest of your life.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So that's my message.
it's a very important message, and I don't think people realize what's going on behind well, closed doors, and then lots of women just won't talk about it because it's so contentious, which, it's the truth, so it needs to be out there.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for
Yes.
coming on and sharing your story, because it's a really important one.
Well, thank you for hosting me. And I'm always available if there's any
Yeah,
particular topic.
I think because we've talked so much, you must have much more to say, so we'll definitely have to put another date in.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
It works for
Thank,
me.
thank you.